She had once stood right in the middle of a busy street, just a few hundred yards from a police station, and no one noticed. She wasn't tied up. She didn't scream for help. She didn't run. She simply walked beside two adults, head bowed, her face almost entirely hidden beneath a thick veil. And the strangest part? That girl was Elizabeth Smart. The same Elizabeth Smart who had been missing for over 9 months, while an entire nation searched in desperation and grief. The most extraordinary rescue of the decade didn't begin with a break in the case, but with a stranger's quiet observation and a silence so eerie it defied reason. How could Elizabeth, a girl raised in a strict Mormon household in Utah, sheltered, disciplined, and taught to speak up, be kidnapped from her own bedroom inside her own home? And why, for the next 9 months? Did she say nothing? Even when she had countless chances to cry for help, there were no screams, no cameras, no physical evidence. Just one small detail that shattered everything. Her radio was still sitting in its charger, and from that moment on, every assumption collapsed. Salt Lake City, summer 2002. In the quiet neighborhood of Federal Heights, neat rows of houses sit peacefully at the foot of the Wasatch Mountains. It's the kind of place that feels untouchable, where doors stay unlocked, children play outside, and prayers are whispered before every family dinner. The Smart family lived in a large, white-windowed home with rose bushes blooming along the porch. They were a classic Mormon family, devout, close-knit, and loving. Elizabeth, just 14, was the second of 6 children. Tall, blonde, gentle, and graceful, she played the harp like an angel. She wasn't the loud, spotlight-stealing type. She was the kind of girl who made people feel safe simply by being near. Every morning, she practiced her harp in the living room as sunlight poured across her hair. Every night, she shared a bedroom with her little sister, Mary Catherine, whispering secrets, telling stories, falling asleep like any other pair of teenage sisters. But only one of them woke up the next morning. Elizabeth was gone. No one heard a thing, no screams, no strange noises. Just a cold breeze drifting through an open window, and a blanket crumpled at the edge of the bed. 9-year-old Mary Catherine was the last person to see her sister. But what she told the adults was overlooked for weeks. A man's voice, like an angel's but empty, had softly called Elizabeth's name in the dark. Days later, the story exploded across the news. 14-year-old girl vanishes in the night. No witnesses, no evidence, no trace. The city mobilized. Flyers blanketed the streets. Search parties, police, even the FBI combed every trail, every ravine, every inch of wilderness. But what no one knew then was this. Elizabeth wasn't locked in a basement. She wasn't trapped in a car. She was only a few miles away, hidden in the woods beneath a white canvas tent. She could hear her name echoing from the search team's radios, but she couldn't answer. Because Immanuel, the man who had taken her, had whispered a promise in the dark. If you scream, I'll kill your entire family. The night of June 4th, 2002 brought no rain, no storm. Just a calm Utah evening, like hundreds before it. The Smart family had gone to bed after attending a school harp recital. Elizabeth had performed a classical solo, and her parents, Ed and Lois Smart, captured the moment on their home video camera. No one knew it would be the last footage of Elizabeth as a free child. Around 1 a.m., Mary Catherine suddenly awoke. She saw a man standing at the edge of the bed, whispering, "Elizabeth, get up and come with me. You know who I am." His voice was flat, emotionless, not threatening, but chilling. Mary lay still, trembling, pretending to sleep. With one eye open, she saw Elizabeth being led away through the open window. Then, silence. No noise, no footsteps, no one else stirred. At dawn, Mary ran to tell her parents. In a panic, they called 911. Within 30 minutes, police were at the scene. But instead of locking down the house immediately, the initial investigators assumed Elizabeth had simply run away. Typical teenage rebellion. And just like that, the first 12 hours, the golden window in any missing child case slipped away. Neighbors from the predominantly Mormon community flooded the streets to search. No one believed Elizabeth had run away. She had never even ridden the bus alone. There was no security footage, no signs of forced entry, just one small footprint outside the window. And something that baffled detectives. The family's guard dog, known to bark fiercely at strangers, hadn't made a sound that night. Under mounting public pressure, the story exploded nationwide. CNN, Fox News, even Oprah ran the headline, "14-year-old girl vanishes without a trace." Some began calling it the next Polly Klaas case. But this time, there was no suspect in the first 24 hours. The FBI joined the case. Mary's account helped create the first sketch. A tall, thin man with silver hair wearing dark clothing. Over 600 people in the area were interviewed. But one name never came up. A drifter who had once worked odd jobs at the Smart House. His name was Brian David Mitchell. He called himself Immanuel, the one sent by God. But if he had taken her, why was Elizabeth's phone still at home? Fully charged, sitting right next to her school books and blue pen. She had been taken in complete silence. No screams, no struggle. He led her across rocky slopes, through a dark canyon, to a wooded hillside just 4 miles from her house. Hidden in the trees stood a makeshift camp, a white canvas tent. Inside, a woman was waiting. Wanda Barzee, Immanuel's wife, welcomed Elizabeth with something resembling a religious ritual. That first night, the 14-year-old was forced to wear a white robe, married off in a spiritual ceremony, and given a new name, Esther. So began the long months of brainwashing, abuse, and quiet despair. Down below, the world was unraveling in search of her. The Smart family plastered her photo everywhere. Local stores, airports, highway billboards. Ed Smart appeared constantly on TV, begging the public for leads. But then, the media narrative began to shift. No longer was she just the kidnapped child. Now they speculated. Could Elizabeth have gone willingly, swept up in religious fanaticism? They scrutinized the family's Mormon faith. Some journalists even implied, did she really want to be found? Police zeroed in on a man named Richard Ricci, a former handyman at the Smart home. He had a criminal record. He'd been fired. He had once stolen minor items. Under media pressure, Ricci was arrested. But before he could be questioned, he died in jail from a brain hemorrhage, a sudden death, and the only lead police had truly believed in vanished. The case stalled. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was still on that mountain. For months, she was forbidden to speak, to make eye contact, to leave the tent. They threatened her daily, disobey, and we'll kill your entire family with this knife. Then, in September 2002, Mitchell took her across state lines to California. They lived like vagabonds, begging, camping, washing up in gas station bathrooms. Elizabeth walked city streets, veiled from head to toe, cloaked in a heavy robe like a religious zealot. She entered libraries. She passed through stores. Police walked by, but no one recognized her. 9 months after her disappearance, Elizabeth returned. In broad daylight, walking beside Mitchell and Barzee, just a few hundred yards from the Sandy police station, a woman spotted her face through the veil. Just a glimpse like a ghost passing by. She froze. 1 second. Then she picked up her phone. I just saw the missing girl. The day Elizabeth was found, there were no cheers. People just stared at her. Dressed in a white robe, face veiled, her eyes glazed like someone waking from a 9-month dream. She nodded when asked to confirm her name. A slow, weary nod. And the first thing she asked the police wasn't, "Where are my parents?" It was, "If I tell the truth, will they kill my family?" When the truth behind Elizabeth Smart's abduction came to light, a flood of questions fell on law enforcement. Because during those 9 months, at least 3 people had seen her in public. Not in the dark, but in broad daylight, in libraries, in stores. At one library in California, an employee grew suspicious. The girl with Mitchell and Barzee was small, quiet, and never spoke. He asked, "Are you okay?" Mitchell interrupted, claiming she was his second wife, part of his own religious belief. The employee called police, but when officers arrived, the group had already left. No warrant, no photo confirmation, no ID check. Just the words. There's no legal reason to detain them. Back in Utah, Mary Catherine, the 9-year-old who had seen her sister taken, had said something important, even in the early weeks. She insisted the man's voice matched someone who had once worked at their home, a homeless man who did yard work. She didn't remember his name, only that he called himself Immanuel. Police dismissed it. A frightened child recalling a voice? Could she really be trusted? Meanwhile, Brian David Mitchell was walking the streets with Elizabeth in plain sight, even landing a temporary job at a San Diego gas station. He made her wait outside, in the shade, head down, arms wrapped tightly around her robe. The store owner later said, "I knew something wasn't right, but but I didn't know what to ask. Those quiet instincts, the gut feelings, were brushed aside as not enough. All the while, the Smart family was crumbling. Lois, her mother, slipped into depression, barely leaving the house. Ed, her father, moved from school to church to news studio, clinging to Elizabeth's photo like a prayer. Her room remained untouched. The dress from her harp recital still hung behind the door. The harp itself sat by the window, layered in dust. But while the world believed she was locked away in the shadows, the truth was, we had seen Elizabeth again and again. We just couldn't believe it was her. Brian David Mitchell didn't hide in the dark. He believed he was the light. During the entire abduction, he didn't lock Elizabeth in a basement or keep her chained. He walked with her, in public, begging for food, preaching scripture, even attending worship services in city parks. He called her Esther, his spiritual wife chosen by God. He preached in plazas, standing on stones, waving a torn Bible with his eyes shut tight as if in communion with a higher power. And Elizabeth, cloaked from head to toe, head bowed, became the silent figure always beside him. No one saw a missing girl. They saw a strange believer and turned away. The painful truth is, we trust stereotypes more than instincts. A young white girl, blonde, barely 14, how could she possibly be the wife of a homeless religious fanatic? Logic said, impossible. So when our gut whispered, I think I know that girl, we told ourselves, I must be wrong. At a church in San Diego, one woman remembered meeting Elizabeth's eyes. They weren't scared, she said. They were empty, like she wasn't even there anymore. But Mitchell was always close, his hand never far from the folding knife in his pocket. And Barzy, his unhinged wife, murmured cryptic scriptures like a shadow moving in circles. Barzi's later testimony revealed chilling truths. Mitchell believed he was a prophet, and Elizabeth a vessel for God's command. He told Barzy, if she tries to run, I'll return and destroy her family. With fire, like Sodom. Elizabeth, at just 14, understood this. It wasn't chains or locked doors that silenced her. It was the bone-deep terror of watching her family die. So she became Esther. She learned to speak like them. She walked beside him, head down, a wife in a nightmare scripted by madness. And even when she walked the streets of Sandy, on the morning of March 12, 2003, she said nothing. Until a woman, just a passerby, not a cop, not a preacher, looked into her eyes and believed. That woman called 911, and for the first time in 9 months, Elizabeth was pulled from a role she never chose. On March 12, 2003, Brian David Mitchell was arrested on a street in Sandy, Utah. No struggle, no weapon, no attempt to flee. He simply looked up at the sky and said, "The will of God is fulfilled." Elizabeth stood just a few feet away. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. For the first time in 9 months, she clenched her fists. And when the officers asked for her name, she softly replied, "I'm Elizabeth." Instantly, the name Brian David Mitchell became a national headline. The media dug up everything. His homeless past, his brief work at the Smart home, his bizarre public sermons. At one point, he'd stood on the steps of Salt Lake's government building, proclaiming visions of fire, purity, and chosen brides. Police had simply told him to move along. No ID check, no further action. It was called a systemic blind spot, because Mitchell was too strange. So strange, in fact, no one thought he could actually be dangerous. Police said he seemed mentally ill. The press called him a religious lunatic, and everyone else just looked the other way. But his files revealed something different. Brian David Mitchell had a history of abuse. He'd once forced his ex-wife to fast for spiritual cleansing. He had written dozens of pages of self-proclaimed prophecies, calling himself Immanuel, God's chosen one, in a handwritten 200-page manifesto found after his arrest. Mitchell detailed his plan to kidnap girls to build a sacred kingdom. Elizabeth, he wrote, was only the first. He intended to take 6 or 7 more, creating his final church in the desert. But what shocked the nation even more was that the justice system didn't rush to put him on trial. Why? Because prosecutors questioned whether Mitchell was mentally fit to stand trial. For over a year after his arrest, he remained in a psychiatric hospital, uncharged. the Smart family began fighting on a new front. Through the media, through petitions, through every camera that would listen. Elizabeth, now 15, stayed quiet in public. But behind closed doors, she was clear. "He's not crazy," she said. He knew exactly what he was doing. Every step was calculated. But if he was calculating, not insane, then how had so many people seen him and still let him walk free? Mitchell was in custody. Elizabeth was rescued. But instead of closure, the Smart family found themselves lost in a new maze. The legal system. From the very first hearings, Mitchell's defense argued he was incompetent to stand trial. They claimed he believed he was a prophet, heard the voice of God, and lived in delusion. But the public's outrage wasn't just over his psychiatric evaluation. It was over the simple, brutal truth. For nearly a year, this man had walked free, even when people raised red flags. In closed-door hearings, experts debated the same question for months. Was Mitchell insane or a manipulator? Yes, he wandered the streets. Yes, he ranted like a madman. But he also knew how to pitch tents in hidden places. He moved locations strategically. He taught Elizabeth how to lie if anyone asked her name. He knew when to vanish. He knew who not to provoke. The media's tone shifted. From praising the police for rescuing Elizabeth, they started asking, why did it take 9 months? Why didn't anyone listen to Mary Catherine when she said the name Immanuel? Why was Richard Ricci targeted? Just because of a criminal record. The Smart family hadn't just fought to bring their daughter home. They had to fight to bring justice to the courtroom. Elizabeth didn't share everything right away. She needed time and dignity. But in private testimony, she recounted it all. Mitchell preaching scripture as punishment. Bar Z forcing her to kneel for hours in forced prayer. The cycle of threats, manipulation, and twisted promises. Eventually, after repeated appeals, the court ruled Mitchell mentally competent to stand trial. In 2010, 7 years after the kidnapping, Brian David Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Wanda Barzee received 15 years, but she was released early in 2018, a decision that sent shockwaves across the country. Justice, finally, had a name, but Elizabeth would live with memories no one else could ever touch. And society, after everything, was left to confront a question it had long refused to ask. Did we fail to see Elizabeth? Not because she was hidden, but because we couldn't believe a girl like her could be held by someone like him. When Elizabeth came home, there was no tearful reunion like in the movies. She didn't break down crying. She didn't throw her arms around her parents like the media had imagined. She walked quietly into the house, sat down in the old living room chair, and said nothing. One psychologist put it simply. She wasn't just taken from her home, she was taken from herself. When police asked, "Why didn't you run when you were out in public? Why didn't you signal to a stranger? Why did you seem so compliant?" Elizabeth answered, "Because things would have been worse if I fought back." And that terrified society. All the scenarios we thought we could count on, that a kidnapped victim would scream, would run, would signal for help. None of them happened. Not because Elizabeth wasn't smart, but because she knew one thing clearly. Resistance meant blood, and that blood might be her parents. Hostage trauma experts call it trauma bonding, a psychological survival instinct where the victim forms a dependent connection to their captor. It's not love. It's not trust. It's reading the captor's moods and doing whatever it takes to stay alive. But what shocked people even more, during her captivity, Elizabeth heard her own name on the radio. She heard her mother sobbing, begging. She heard newscasters calling for her. She heard the community praying. And still, she did nothing. Barzee once said she heard her family on the news and just sat there, not one tear. But the truth was, Elizabeth didn't dare cry. She was terrified that if she showed weakness, they'd believe she was weak. And if they believed that, they'd hurt her worse. Her memories returned in scattered fragments. Nights curled up in the tent. Mornings where she was forced to call her abductor husband. The times she walked past a grocery store, saw a boy who looked like her little brother, and turned away. So, if a kidnapped girl could walk among us and we don't even see her, how many more Elizabeths are still out there, hidden in plain sight? After Mitchell was arrested, investigators reviewed the entire search operation. What they found wasn't a lack of evidence. It was too many signs, dismissed because they didn't fit the original narrative. From the start, authorities believed Elizabeth had been taken far away, so all search efforts focused on out-of-state areas. They used helicopters, K-9 units, even satellite imaging. But no one imagined she might be just 4 miles from her home, on a mountain behind the neighborhood. Too close to believe, too illogical to accept. Even Mary Catherine's eyewitness description was brushed off as too vague. A bearded man in dark clothes. What good was that? Thousands looked like that. But only one called himself Immanuel. Only one had worked in Elizabeth's yard, and he had been overlooked. Not once, but multiple times. Emergency response experts began asking tough questions. Why don't we trust children? When their instincts are often sharper than adult logic? Why didn't we broaden the investigation beyond typical abduction patterns? And why do we assume a kidnapped child has to act like a victim to deserve being rescued? Elizabeth didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't run. So people didn't believe she needed saving. She didn't follow the script. She didn't react the way the media expected. She didn't fit the mold of the perfect victim. But the truth is, she survived precisely because of that. She survived by being silent, by stepping into a role, becoming someone else. And the painful irony, that survival, made people doubt her. The story of Elizabeth Smart isn't just about a kidnapping. It's a mirror, held up to American society, reflecting how the system, from police to press to the public, was blinded by its own expectations. We believe in good guys and bad guys, victims and villains. We want neat, logical stories. But Elizabeth proved something different. Sometimes, the truth doesn't have to be logical. It just needs to be believed. Elizabeth came home, but she was never truly the same. She still played the harp, still smiled in interviews, still carried the title, Extraordinary Survivor. But in her eyes, there was something unnamed, a thin veil of distance between her and the rest of the world. The girl she once was believed in goodness. She believed that if someone was in danger, adults would come to help. That if she got lost, she just had to scream, and someone would stop. But 9 months in the hands of a self-proclaimed prophet taught her something else. Just because you scream doesn't mean you'll be heard. Just because you're hurting doesn't mean you'll be believed. Her family moved on, but at every gathering, every Thanksgiving dinner, every harp melody drifting through their home, there was always a quiet shadow behind it all. Barzee, the woman who bound her in twisted rituals, was released from prison in 2018. Mitchell, sentenced to life, still writes new prophecies from behind bars. Elizabeth became a speaker. She told her story, not to be pitied, but to remind people, not every missing person gets a happy ending. And not every victim gets heard unless they follow the script society expects. How many other children weren't as lucky as Elizabeth? How many Mary Catherines dismissed just because they were just kids? How many Immanuels are still preaching on street corners? And we walk by thinking he's just crazy, so we ignore them? We see people like Mitchell on the street every day. But if they're not holding a knife, not screaming, not dressed in black, who will stop and look twice? And if Elizabeth hadn't been a blonde girl from a white Mormon family in the media spotlight, would she have ever been found?